control the vertical.
Welcome to Anthologic, the TV anthology podcast. I am your host, Mark. Anthologic is a podcast dedicated to exploring the good, the bad, and the odd of horror, science fiction, and the best of mystery suspense anthology shows and series on TV. Join me as we slip through the cracks of reality to approach the extremes of experience, where we can peruse the stories and art of a sinister fairground of strange and wonderful rides. And now we go on to the show that is the focus of this particular episode. Welcome to this episode of Anthologic with your host Mark. Today we're covering a British anthology show from the early 60s called Out of This World. Now this was an interesting show. It was an anthology series developed for ITV, which is unusual because most anthologies in Britain were BBC around this time, if there was anything. It was an ITV franchise called ABC Television, which I think was kind of an American-British kind of thing. It was intended to sell things to America as well as for ITV. And it was a spin-off of the Armchair Theatre anthology series, which I don't think I've covered yet. I need to get to that. And these ones were introduced by Boris Karloff, so it's similar in many ways to Boris Karloff's Thriller series too, which was made, I think, before this. Now this it was a sci-fi oriented one rather than horror, and it borrowed from various science fiction writers, including Asimov, Philip K. Dick, and so on. It's kind of does its job well. It's often described as a precursor to another series called Out of the Unknown, whose initial music score is integrated into the music score of this show. It's the whistling bit, I believe, is Out of the Unknown. And Out of the Unknown was actually created by the person that created this series, Out of This World, after she left ABC. And that was Irene Shubik who did that. Now, no prints apart from one episode survives, so that's the only one that I can talk about. There was kind of one that was broadcast as part of Armchair Theatre called Dumb Martian, but in terms of Out of This World, only 13 episodes were made and only one survives, and this is the second episode in that series. It's called Little Lost Robot. It's adapted from a short story by Asimov, adapted by Leah Lemon and directed by Doug James. First aired on the 7th of July 1962. Now, this is part of Asimov's universe, so it's a fairly rich tapestry going on here. Impressively so. It deals with Asimov's laws of robotics. There's a character in it called Maxine Audley, who I believe is in a lot of Asimov's works around robots, but I'm not knowledgeable enough to be sure of that. I just believe that's the case. And you can actually buy this Little Lost Robot as a standalone DVD. It's available on Region 2, British, from the BFI. It's also on YouTube. There's a couple of versions of it on YouTube. So if you go on YouTube and look for Little Lost Robot, you can see it. It's 50 minutes. It's fairly long. It's not short. And apparently elements of this story were integrated into the film I, Robot. So I think where they're debating whether the robot should protect itself over humans, stuff like that. And it's also was adapted for radio. An adaptation of the story was adapted for radio on BBC Radio 4 in February 2017. So it had a bit of reuse. It takes place a military based on an asteroid, and I did have a bit of a chuckle during this because at one point a man was talking about his history and he said, "Oh yeah, back in 2021 I did this." It always makes me kind of have a bit of a chuckle where you see something made in the past, referring to a year either you're in or you've already passed. It's kind of fun. And these guys are developing hyperspace drives. And, that's kind of Asimov's Foundation stuff and Empire sort of stuff. So, again, it's grounded heavily in Asimov's kind of universe. And they're talking about what happens is a researcher is doing some work and this robot's just annoying him. And the robots are called Nestors. The code name is NS2, but they call them Nestors. Nestor. And he just says to the robot, "Get lost," which the robot takes literally. He takes it literally and disappears. They think they know it's in a certain room full of other robots. But what's happened is this particular robot has had certain of its laws of robotics removed so it could do certain work. There's like a philosophical conundrum why it had to have this removed. They would find it was causing inefficiencies in its mining process. I won't go into it, but essentially they've removed, and it's hidden in plain sight in that it's standing in a room with other robots of its kind, so it looks exactly the same. Serial numbers don't help and so on, but they know the robots in the room, all of them apart from this one, have the full laws of robotics. And I think the one removed is "Thou shalt not harm a human." So I can't remember the specifics. So that is a philosophical conundrum. If they let all these robots go and this one robot somehow harms a human in its actions, it's going to create a lot of doubt around robotics. And this appears to be a sensitive time in the history of humans and robots where people are still suspicious of robots. So kind of where we're going to be at soon, I should imagine, as robots become more prevalent. And one thing that's addressed in it is a principle that Asimov came up with, which is called the Frankenstein complex, which is a fear of mechanical or artificial beings. That's kind of addressed. Now, what happens is it's investigated by this character Maxine Audley, played by... Sorry, I've called the character Maxine Audley. It's Susan Calvin. Susan Calvin is the character that appears for Asimov, but played by Maxine Audley, the actress Maxine Audley. Pretty good as well. Where she's coming up with logical tests to try and discriminate robots. They basically get all these robots to do a certain action, and that should reveal the one that has a different set of programming principles from the rest. However, the robots all act the same, so they realise this robot is cleverer than they think, which is an interesting idea, right? It can work out, it can sort of tell that it's trying to be rooted out, and it's protecting itself, and one of the laws it has got is to protect itself, so that kind of makes sense. If, like I say, they're frightened that if it were to be released, they would be found out that robots were operating on different principles, which cause all sorts of issues. Now, they do need these robots in the field because they can't get any extra ones and they need them working, so they're not quite sure what to do. They interview the robots, ask them questions. It's a bit like the Void concept in Blade Runner. It's a precursor of that in many ways. Dr. Calvin is starting to worry that this robot's evolving into different sort of sets of emotions and perhaps even developing its own psychology. So this, again, is a bit like Philip K. Dick's Blade Runner and Replicants and so on. So in the end, she puts herself in danger to try and spot the robot. Ultimately... they kind of figure out which one it is. So it kind of precipitates. The story works out. Now, it's a 50-minute thing made in 1962. I was expecting it to be clunky and awkward and not very good. BBC have tended to do this sort of thing better with Quatermass, so I had very low expectations. But you know what? It was good. It was good, and it's a shame the rest of them have been lost. It is a real shame about that. But I very much enjoyed this, and I would recommend you give it a watch on YouTube. As I say, Little Lost Robot is what you have to Google. It was solid. The intro by Karloff was good. The music was interesting. The shots the opening sort of credits, where basically they had like sci-fi kind of music played over speeded up growing plants, that kind of thing, to give it an unearthly feel. It was kind of cool too. And it's interesting, it appears to be a pure science fiction anthology series. Now, most of them are, they veer into fantasy and a bit of horror, but this felt about as pure as you can get. I mean, Asimov is a very pure sci-fi. Technology is wonderful, kind of sci-fi writer, but also deals with the issues around technology, the human issues around technology. And this does that quite successfully. As I say, kind of foreshadowing what we would come to see in things like Blade Runner and other more recent films where human and artificial life interact, computer-based artificial life interact. I'm trying to think of a few. There's been a few films recently. Is it Her? I can't remember. There's been a few recent ones that sort of deal with that. And a good little story. I haven't read much Asimov. I've read the first Foundation book and I quite liked it. And I've read some of his ones about involving robots. So I enjoyed this greatly. I think that's all I've got to say about it. It's a recommend from me, and it's time to depart, I think. But before I go, may I ask, is anybody out there?
There's nobody here but us chickens.
We now return control of your television set to you until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to